Okay, so today I'm going to be making homemade soap, and this is the kind from scratch with lye or caustic soda. And this will be a cold processing method rather than hot processing. So all your ingredients have to be weighed by weight rather than by volume. So no liquid measurements. It'll all be done in ounces or grams if you prefer. I'll be using coconut oil and olive oil for my soap, which is around about a 50-50 quantity, but I will show you what I use. And I will also be using essential oils for fragrance. This is my bog standard recipe that I tend to use every time I make soap. It makes a really nice soap. It's kind of hard, it's hard enough so that it doesn't go mushy, but it also makes nice bubbles. So my coconut oil is quite solid because I live in a cold climate, and my kitchen, although warm, is not warm enough to keep it fully liquid. So I've slightly melted this on top of the wood burner. So now I've weighed out all of my coconut oil, and this is the recipe I use. As you can see, it's pretty much 50-50 olive oil and coconut oil by weight. And next I'm going to be weighing out my olive oil as well. And it pretty much works out as a whole bottle of coconut oil. That's I'm not sure if that's a litre bottle potentially. Yes, so a litre bottle, and 2 of the containers of coconut oil, and it works out that way. There's no wastage. So, but I still have to measure out this olive oil by weight rather than by liquid volume. Next, we need to weigh out the water as well. Again, this is by ounces rather than in millilitres. And also now the gloves have gone on to measure out the lye or caustic soda. It's very important you wear gloves when handling lye or caustic soda because it obviously is caustic and can be really bad for your skin. It can cause some nasty burns if you're not careful, but that's no reason to worry too harshly about it. You just got to handle it carefully like you would anything. If you were handling anything hot, you'd be careful. You'd wear an oven mitt or something, same sort of thing. So now I've moved over to outside because when you mix lye with water it produces some nasty fumes, and we don't have the ability to open the windows in the middle of winter, or we could but we're not going to. It'll be a bit cold in the kitchen. So now I'm adding the lye to the water, and you always do it this way around. You never add water to lye because it can be quite volcanic and it could go everywhere, which is not so bad if it's outside, but you don't want it to go all over yourself or all over your kitchen if you're working in the kitchen. So now we'll just mix in the lye really well into the water until it's completely dissolved, and this can take a little while. This took quite a few minutes, and be very careful when doing this because the lye mixture gets very hot. Now, doing a cold process method means you can use the heat from the lye liquid to melt the solid fats of the soap. Normally you would bring the fats up to temperature, you would melt them and bring them up to the same temperature as your lye solution before you mix them together. But using a cold process method, you're using the heat from the lye to melt the solid fats. And this possibly wouldn't work with a harder fat if you were working with something like lard or tallow. But something like coconut oil melts at body temperature, so it melts at fairly low temperature anyway. So now I'm just chopping up and stirring up the coconut oil to melt it into the rest of the solution, and this took a few minutes. It is winter here, or early spring, and it's quite cold, so this took me about 5 minutes. And but it gets there. You just got to keep it working, keep it moving until all the fats are dissolved. So now I've come back into the kitchen, and I'm being very careful. I've put the pot on some kitchen roll to keep it off my work surface, and I'm going to be using a stick blender to bring this up to what is called trace. And I'm going to be blitzing this for 2 or 3 seconds at a time, and then stirring it through, and then 2 or 3 more seconds and stirring it through. And be very careful to keep your stick blender upright rather than lifting it to the surface of the pan. You want to keep it to the bottom so you don't spray any of the solution around your kitchen, which would be really bad. So we'll just keep this working until it comes up to trace. And trace is where you will, if you were to lift the blender out without it running and drizzle the solution over the surface of the pan, it will leave a light kind of a trace. You can see where you've drizzled it. It won't be really, really thick. You don't want it thick. You want it to be like very thin custard. And I keep mine slightly back from full trace because sometimes adding essential oils can tip it over the edge and it can go thick very, very quickly. You can't see this very well on the video, but you can see a light trace when you drizzle over. You can just see where I've been. So now I'm going to be using these moulds. These are silicone baking moulds and they're only used for this purpose. Same with the stick blender attachment. I have 2 attachments for my stick blender. The stick blender is just for the kitchen, but one attachment is for food use and one is for soap use only, and they are kept completely separate. All my soap making stuff is. The pan is also just for this purpose. I'm going to be stirring in this foam into the soap so it doesn't just sit on the surface. And the stainless steel spoon that I'm using and the bowls I used earlier and the glass Pyrex can all be reused in the kitchen. Just needs to be washed really well because the solution won't soak into them. So now I'm pouring this into the moulds. Be very careful doing this, and my moulds are already in the box. I'm going to be keeping them in, so I don't have to try and lift these flexible silicone moulds afterwards when they're full of caustic soap. I'm making 2 soaps this time, which is generally what I do. Sometimes I will just make 1 scent and I will add the essential oils in the pan and then just pour it in very, very quickly because it can thicken up quite quickly once you add these essential oils. Certain ones affect it more than others. But this time I'm using a peppermint oil in the first one, and that is going to be for a soap for in the kitchen, for washing hands in the kitchen. And there's around about a tablespoon of essential oil in the bottom of both these bottles. They're not completely full bottles, they're just what's left over. So the peppermint's gone in and I'm quickly stirring that through the solution. Turns out that peppermint doesn't seem to affect it much, but geranium oil can. And geranium is what I'll be using in the second soap, and that'll be our main bathroom soap for washing your hands after you've been to the bathroom. So find a space, and here's the geranium oil, and I will quickly mix that through. It turned out I could have gone a little bit further with trace with my soap earlier, but I've had a problem of it going thick very, very quickly and really struggling to work with it. So I like to err on the side of caution. So now we're going to close up this box and leave this to sit for a time. I'll leave it for a couple of hours and it'll set up more like fudge, and I can come back to it and score out the bars of soap. And the pan and all these bits which need to be cleaned, I'm going to leave these overnight, and all this trace soap will turn into soap and it'll make it a lot easier to clean. At the moment it's quite greasy. So now I've come back, this is a couple of hours, and I'm going to score these into bars of actual soap. And it's of a reasonable texture to actually do. It's kind of like when you make fudge in the fridge or something like that, or a fridge cake. It's not solid like chocolate, it's softer. So now I've got all these bars marked out. I can leave this soap and I will leave this overnight for them to completely set up into solid bars. They can be separated out. So as you can see, this is the next day and these are completely set and I can separate these bars, but these are not ready for using yet. These will be still very caustic and you have to leave these for 4 to 6 weeks. For home use, I'll leave it a good 4 weeks, and if it was for gifts for other people, I would be a little more careful and leave it 6 weeks. I think the exception was once I gave some for Christmas, but because I were given the gifts a week or 2 beforehand, by the time people would use them, it would be 6 weeks anyway. These are completely solid, but you wouldn't want to use them unless they're still caustic until the chemical reactions have taken place. So I'm now going to place these on a cooling rack back inside this box, and this box will be kept out of the way, closed up for the time, and these soaps will be kept separate so the air can get around them and the chemical reaction can take place in all of them. And yeah, that's all there is to it. It's really easy, really simple. The soap making took me probably an hour at the most to make all the soap. And yeah, you should give it a go.